And right now, I'm going to introduce you the first speaker, who is Filip. And Filip is the CTO and co-founder of Vue Storefront community partner of Vue.js, a Vue school teacher, and co-organizer of Vue.js Meetup. Hi, Filip. You do a lot of stuff.
Yes, indeed.
If I am correct, the modern front-end architecture and building interfaces for developers are one of your passions, right?
Yep.
Nice.
This is what I do most of the time.
Oh, that sounds fun. And your talk is going to be about how an all-in-one heavyweight solution becomes one of the first large-scale projects in the world to implement composition API in Next, resulting in a much more flexible framework that fits almost any environment. That seems such an interesting talk. I'm really, really eager to learn how you guys did that. And I have, for this first talk, a pet curiosity to share. So Filip has 5 cats. One it is his own, and the other 4 are in foster homes. Am I correct?
Yep, but thankfully all of them are safe in the other room, so they won't interrupt us.
Oh, but that would be just cute.
Yeah, it happened many times, but I'm prepared now.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. So I would like to welcome everyone to the talk Rebuilding Vue Storefront, the biggest e-commerce Vue project with composition API. Filip, the stage is yours.
Okay, so hello everyone. I hope you are energized and ready to learn a lot today. It's an honor to be the first one. So I will skip the introduction because it was already done. So my talk is about rewriting Vue Storefront to composition API. And if you don't know what Vue Storefront is, probably many of you don't know. I think this in-depth diagram explains the thing, but just in case it's not descriptive enough, Vue Storefront is e-commerce front-end framework based on Vue.js that could and will in the future, because we are targeting more and more platforms. It will work with any e-commerce backend platform. So if you work with Vue and e-commerce, this is most likely the project for you, and you should at least check it out. Okay, so we know what Vue Storefront is. Now let's get to the presentation. So in Vue Storefront, we are using composition API for a while now. I think we're one of the first ones to start for a large scale. And we are one of the largest projects using composition API right now. We are also using it in production, despite the fact that it's not recommended. So I wanted to share with you some of our findings. And before we get into the details, also I want to make sure that we are all on the same page. So to those who don't know yet, a brief introduction to composition API, very brief. So the simplest possible definition would be calling it a set of Vue.js and APIs that can be used outside or even without components. So previously, when we wanted to use these methods, data properties, watchers, etc., they were all part of a component API called Options API. And composition API is allowing us to use the same features, but outside of the components. And a good example of very similar API from Vue 2 is Vue Observable. So Vue Observable was actually letting you to use Vue Observable without outside components. So this is how it looks like. And in this example, we are just importing component features we want to use as functions. Then we are using them in a setup method. So a setup method is an addition from Vue 3 and composition API. And the setup method is basically behaving like a replacement of most of the other methods. And everything that is returned by this setup method is available in a template. So the same way that as data was available and methods were available and computed properties were available in a template, the things that are returned from the setup method are also available in a template, but this time it's more explicit. So it's actually easier to grasp. Also, with the setup method, you have full TypeScript support and things like this. So it's really an improvement in terms of development experience. And we can divide composition API functions to this is just my division, to old ones that are kind of like syntactic sugar for currently existing Vue APIs, and also a new ones that are bringing some additional functionalities. And there's much more of the old ones. So the old ones are mostly wrappers for this functionalities that we have right now. So we have reactive and ref, which are basically behaving more or less like Vue observable. We have lifecycle hooks available, so on updated, on mounted, etc. We also have watchers, and for watchers we also have watch and watch effect. We also have computed properties, obviously, and provide inject, which is behaving more or less like in Vue 2, but slightly different. So these are not only wrappers, but some of the APIs are working a little bit different right now. For example, you don't have all these reactivity caveats when you're mutating a sub-property of an object or an array. Then you don't have to use VueSet for that. It just works because it's using proxies. So it could look familiar, but there are some subtle changes in these APIs as well. And new ones include mostly helper functions that are meant to help us working with these old wrappers. And sometimes they're also bringing some extended functionalities. So we have read-only method, we have watch effect, which is basically behaving like watch without immediate flag. We have unref function, which is basically changing the ref object to a plain property. We have isRef, which is checking if the property is a reference. We have reactive, etc. So as you see, we basically have access to a bunch of helper functions that are letting us to work more safely with Composition API. Okay, so now we are on the same page. And it's time to talk why this new Composition API is so great and how it changes the way we are building our application, because I really believe it changes. At least in our case, it changed a lot. So to understand this, we need to dig a little bit deeper into Vue ecosystem itself. So the way how the Vue ecosystem works like now is enforcing or maybe promoting some certain way of organizing your code. Specifically, it is promoting grouping it by file type or responsibility. So let me explain what I mean. When we build a Vue component, a single Vue component that contains different functionalities and works with different domains, so it could work in this example. This is a component in a block, and this component in a block is fetching the posts, it's fetching the comments. It also has something to do with authentication. So we have no way of keeping the logic responsible for certain feature or domain in just one place. We have it distributed. So we are putting methods in methods property, we're putting data in data property, then we invoke them in the lifecycle hook. So it looks more or less like this. Each color, like if we have a single component, each color is representing a business logic of a certain feature. Don't worry if you can't read that, it's not meant to be readable. So each color is representing a business logic related to a certain feature, and as you can see, it's distributed across whole component. So if we want to remove this feature, it takes us a little bit of searching to remove all its side effects. If we want to extend it, also it's a little bit harder because we have to look through all the components to understand it. And it works the same with high-level architecture, so not only with components. We have a centralized Vue store, usually, which is responsible for all data-related operations. Basically, it's handling our state. And inside this Vue store, we could have multiple modules. Sometimes we also have a data layer for API calls. And as you can see, usually we have it distributed in directories like this. So our folder structure could look more or less like this. We have folder for each file type. And I think this is still considered the most common way of organizing code in Vue applications. I think you stumbled upon something like this. And we could add another folder for helper function. So, and another folder for as long as we came up with a new type of file, we are just creating a new folder and putting it in there. Sometimes there are utilities folders. It could be a very, very huge number of them. So, as I said, like, there is nothing wrong in organizing your code this way, because this is how Vue.js by design is promoting you to do. But it could also lead to some significant maintenance issues, like navigation through the code. As I just have showed on the component, you can think about these issues, but on much, much more complex organisms. So it's much harder to look through all dependencies of a certain feature through whole code base. So not to mention poor developer experience. So we usually work with a certain feature, not a file type, when we are doing something. When we have a task to do, we usually work with a certain feature. So it's much better to have everything related to this particular feature in one place, rather than look for every piece of the puzzle across, whole code base. So why don't we organize our code by the domain it's interacting with instead of a file type? I think it's much more intuitive to use it this way. And by doing this, you also always work on a small piece of your code base. You don't care about how everything else works, because everything related to a feature that you're working on is in a single place. And there is a great article about this approach that I highly recommend you to read. And I think you should make a screenshot right now if you want. So the author shows how to organize your code into so-called domain modules, where all the features related to specific domain are in a single module, pretty self-descriptive. So I'm a big fan of domain-driven design. So we obviously tried to apply it in Vue Storefront, despite Vue 2 limitations. And the funny thing is that back then we had no idea about domain-driven design. It just felt more intuitive and easier to maintain to do this way. And this is how we came up with Vue Storefront modules. So this is how they look, more or less. So every module contained mixins, Vue stores, routes, types, etc., required for a given feature to work. And what was great about this module is the fact that it was the only place. There was a single place where you were registering all of that features. So you were hooking into all the extension points of your application in a single place. And if you wanted to remove a module or replace it, we had all the puzzles in one place, so there was no risk of overlooking some side effects. So this is this single place. The module function looked like this, and it had access to app instance, store, router, app configuration. So we were defining extension points of our application that module can hook into. So you could imagine that we could pass even more context here, depending on your requirements. So it's really, really handy. Imagine that you have exactly the same thing, but instead of index.ts file, you are registering it in store.ts, router.ts, app.ts, etc., etc. So then you're producing much more side effects related to this particular feature. And now when we wanted to register a module, so import this function, we had to pass it to register module function with some optional config, like we do with Vue plugins. And that was it. So we had a single function and then a single place where we were registering this function. Okay, so enough of the background. So we know that Vue 2 is not promoting domain-driven design, but there are some hacks we can do, but there is no like first-class support for this approach. So is Composition API bringing an improvement in this area? And you probably know the answer already, but let's see. So in Composition API, we have all the code in a single setup function. No special properties for methods, no special property for computed properties, etc. Just setup. And because of that, we can group code related to certain feature together. So it's much easier to navigate through it. But this is not all of its awesomeness, but because we can do much more. We can externalize the code. So these are examples from Vue Composition API docs. So because Composition API is not requiring components to work, we can put business logic related to specific feature in a separate function and make it reusable across whole application. So in this example, we are externalizing the business logic related to getting the mouse position to some other function, and we can use that function in any place of our application. And every place we create a new instance of this use mouse position variables inside, so X and Y. And these functions are commonly called composables. So it's not an official name, but as a community, we have power of lobbying it. And I think most of the people call them composables right now. And you could say that, okay, but that was also possible with mixins. And yes, but mixins had numerous issues like name collisions with component API. If you had a load method in mixin and load method in your component, there was a name collision. And if you were injecting a bunch of mixins and all of them had load method, well, good luck with debugging. Also, there was lack of transparency. So you didn't know what from the mixin you're actually pulling into your component. And with composition API, we immediately see that we are pulling X and Y. So we can think about composition API as mixins done right, but even better, I'd say. So our root components or page components, depending on what we are building, because Vue.js is not only for single page applications, can now utilize these composables. And you have to admit that this looks super clean. At least it looks like this to me. Okay. So coming back to our blog that we have just seen. Instead of a bunch of files distributed across whole application, we'll have a nice and descriptive composables with clean responsibilities, like use post, use comment, use user. I think you can guess what they do from their names, and that's the beauty of it. And if all the code related to a certain feature is in one place, we have full understanding of it without worrying that we forgot about some of its pieces or some edge cases. So it's much easier to extend such feature. It's much easier to work on it. It's also much easier to remove it if we have to, because there are no external dependencies. So if we just remove this composable and all their instantiations, we know that that's all. So generally, it's much easier to maintain code written with composition API, and this is a single one reason why I would advise to use it. Okay, so like all of that was a theory, but the talk is about how we are using it in Vue Storefront. So let me show how we are using it in Vue Storefront. So all the business logic we have in Vue Storefront is basically a set of composition API functions. And if you want to use it, then you just install the package with the integration to your e-commerce platform and use it. So it contains only the composition API functions, nothing else. That's enough. And of course, we are also shipping a default theme that has it plugged into the UI, but you can just use a package with composition API functions. And on this image, you see how perfectly these composables are descriptive and how they are mapping to certain pages. So we can have all the business logic related to a certain page or certain activity in composables, and then on the page itself have only the UI logic. So this is also a very good split of responsibilities. And this is how typical Vue Storefront composable look like. So what makes Vue composables much better than React hooks, because React hooks are basically an API that inspired Vue.js core team to create composables and composition API. So the thing that makes them better is the fact that they're embracing Vue reactivity. So what makes them better is basically Vue itself. And because of that, they can manage their own state. And this is much, much bigger advantage than it's seen. In fact, with composition API, you probably won't need Vuex or any other state management library in your application. So under the hood, like the enormously simplified version of such composable could look like this. So we have a local state, we have a search method that is interacting with the state, and all implementation details are hidden, and we're exposing the composable state and functions that are interacting with the state. So it's kind of like a small Vue module. We have actions, mutations. So we can modify also its internals without introducing breaking changes, because we have strict API in here. So if we decide in the future that we want to search for our product in a different way, it's not a breaking change. And at the bottom, you see that I have used computed properties, so we can use them to make our state read-only. So we can be sure that it can't be modified from the outside. So by doing this, we're also designing like how this composable should be used. And because we don't manage the state in the UI, the data state, the components are much cleaner. So take a look at this example. This is a simple product page built with Vue Storefront. So in product page, what we want to display is obviously product information and usually a button allowing us to add product to the cart. So it's pretty intuitive that we will use product for product information and use cart for cart. And here what we are doing is we're invoking search method to fetch the product with a given ID, and we're taking the ID from the URL, and load function to load the cart. And we're invoking these methods inside useFetch hook, because this example is from Next. And if you don't know what useFetch is, it works exactly like a fetch method, but is usable inside setup function. And below, we're getting a first variant of a product and assigning it to the product object, because what the search could return is basically an array of products with all the variants of a certain product. By variants, I mean we could have a t-shirt, and this t-shirt could be green, blue, yellow. So these are these variants, and we are picking one variant, usually the default one, and assigning it to a product object. And now what I really like is look at the UI. So on the left side, in just 2 lines of code, we handled loading state and loading failure. And below, we are displaying product information using getters. So getters are just Vue Storefront thing, and they are just functions that are meant to help extracting data from complex objects like product, category. Trust me, if you work with e-commerce, it sometimes could be a pain in the ass. Another advantage of these getters is the fact that they're transforming this data formats to the one that are more friendly to being displayed in the UI. And at the end, we're adding add to cart button. And this is basically a fully working product page that you can write in 5 minutes. And all of that because most of the logic lies in composables, including the state management logic. So we managed to separate the UI part from the business logic part. And pretty much like it was with Vuex, except we don't need it now. Okay, so sometimes you also need to share the same state between composables. We haven't seen how to do this. For example, you want to have access to the same cart object with all use cart invocations. So even if it's instantiated in many components at the same time. So when I add a product in product page with this code to the cart, I want it to be immediately visible in my microcart component, which is also using useCart. So they have to have a shared state. And in this case, the only thing you have to do is lifting up your state outside of the composable function. So it will be instantiated only once and shared across all composable invocations. So this is really handy how we can easily create a shared state. Okay, so what if we don't want composables? I said that composition API is great and we don't need state management libraries, but like what if we like the way how Vuex is managing the state? What is subjectively we think is better? Or if we don't want to keep some of the state properties in composables? Well, with Vue Composition API, you can even write your own Vuex in just few lines of code. And this is another example of such code in Vue Storefront. And don't bother with this Vue use. This is just a caveat of Vue 2 Composition API plugin, because we are still using Composition API within Vue 2, because Next is not supporting Vue 3 yet. Next 3 will. but there is no ETA for that, as far as I know. Okay, coming back to this component. So we have a state. We are using a reactive property for that, which is working pretty much like Vue observable. Then we have mutations, and mutation is toggle cart sidebar or toggle login modal. And we also have getters. So is cart sidebar open? Is login modal open? These are getters. So exactly like in Vue, we can utilize whole Flux architecture if we also add some actions, but there's no business logic fetching in there, so we don't need them. We can utilize whole Flux architecture with composition API. So as you can see, composition API is not only often removing a need of using state management libraries, but also can be a state management library. Also, with composition API, it's much easier to use any library because there are no external dependencies like Vue we have to hook into. For example, in Vue Storefront, this is all the code that you have to write to actually make use of Vue Storefront. And you can write it anywhere, in Vue.js application, in JavaScript application. With composition API, basically it's even usable within React application. And I've seen some screenshots. I think they were not from Ivan, but they were shared by Ivan about using the Vue composition API in React. So feel free to try. And there are even more benefits coming from composition API. So thanks to the fact that we can use component features and reactivity outside of our components and encapsulate them inside composables, we can make our composables server-side rendering ready out of the box. And trust me, server-side rendering with composition API is challenging. I think that's a good word, if we don't swear. And with Nuxt composition API, which is a wrapper to normal composition API, you can put logic responsible for handling server-side rendering inside your composables. So Nuxt composition API have composition functions that you can use to handle server-side state and fetching. And they are mostly wrappers to currently existing features. For example, use async is a wrapper to async data, use fetch is a wrapper for fetch, etc. And if you want to learn Nuxt composition API, you can read how to utilize this from my article on Vue School. So link is below. But if you write Nuxt composition API Vue School on Google, you will probably also see this article. But like a disclaimer, keep in mind that Nuxt composition API has some bugs and issues, and they are clearly stating on the documentation that it's not production ready. So of course we are also using it in production, but we had to do a lot of workarounds in Vue Storefront to make it work. So if it could make sense for new projects to use that, if you know that your project will roll out in a year or so, but it's definitely challenging and not recommended for projects that should go to production right now, unless you have a lot of time and want to dig very deep into how Nuxt server-side rendering works. You'll most likely have to wait for Nuxt 3 to fully benefit from it. Okay, so thank you very much. I hope you learned something interesting from this talk and that is inspired you to at least check composition API. And for Vue Storefront, it was an absolute game changer, and I love it. It simplified not only our public API, but also made it much easier for us to maintain the code. So the benefits are for both sides. And you can check how we use it in our repo. And don't forget to leave a star if you like the project. And if you have any questions, you can reach me via Filip Rakowski on Twitter. My DMs are open. You can also follow Vue Storefront on Twitter. And I guess that's it. Thank you very much.
Hi. Thank you very much, Filip. This was a very interesting talk. And definitely there are a lot of new things coming up with composition API that can make our life as developers so much easier, I think. I have a personal question to you. Do you have like some sort of metrics / feelings from the developers? How much implementing the composition API has made the life of the daily basis of maintainability easier?
I don't have any exact numbers because it's hard to quantify such things, but so far everyone who switched from Vue Storefront to Vue Storefront Next, which is utilizing composition API, they were really excited, and they said that it's much simpler. And we also managed to speed up the process of creating a POC for our clients or for previous Vue Storefront. I think it was something between a week or two, and with this version of Vue Storefront, it's doable in 3-4 days. So like there are significant improvements. Of course, like you can't say that it's all because of composition API, because this is just a tool. So it also has to be applied in the right way. But it's definitely a tool that is giving you much more possibilities to get these improvements.
Okay. There is another question that came in right now. What do you think about naming things in one way or in another way?
About what?
About naming in one way and another way, about like files, functions, and everything. Like, do you have any? What do you think about the naming?
I think the question has to be more direct. I mean, what I think about the naming of composition API functions?
Yes.
I think it's okay. I mean, if you're asking about the API itself from Vue core team, it's pretty descriptive. It's basically saying what is exposing. So there's nothing to comment here. And if you are talking about this convention about use something, well, this is something embraced from the React community, and they're embracing it really heavily. So when Vue composables are kind of like React hooks, I think it's good to follow this convention.
So we have the same everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
There is another question that just popped up. Do you have any performance gain numbers, like in bundle size or something like that?
So this one is tricky because we are using Vue 2 plugin for composition API. So this is basically still using Vue 2 under the hood, but they're less direct, I say, gains. For example, we are not using Vuex anymore, and because of that, we don't have to bundle Vuex. Also, in Next, Vuex itself is adding some time to the time to interactive metrics. So the time between when you ask for a server-side rendered page to the moment when it arrives to your browser. So Vuex is adding time to this metric. Sometimes it's even 1 second. In our case, we omitted that. I think that like with composition API, you will end up using much less third-party libraries, and also some of the third-party libraries that you will use will be much lighter. If you take a look how the new version of Vuex looks like, it's much lighter. Also Pinia from Pozva, which is kind of like an experiment of a state management library with composition API, is much lighter. So I think like indirectly, it will lead to much smaller libraries, therefore much smaller bundles. And we all know that Vue 3 is much faster. So there will be also improvements because of Vue 3 itself. But as I said, like it's just a tool, so it has to be applied right.
Of course, as everything that we do pretty much. But it's good to always keep the focus on the user. So that's when the performance and the sizing of things are so important.
Exactly. I'm writing a whole series about this on Vue School. So.
Oh, nice. When will it be live?
It is. It has like 6 or 7 parts. I'm writing it from like almost a year, I guess. So you can check it out.
Nice. That would be very interesting. Leave the link on the chat, on the event chat, so we can go check.
Okay, I will.
Do you have anything else to add to your talk?
No, I don't think so, except thank you very much for having me.